What if I told you that the true cost of war isn't just measured in dollars and cents, but in the lives of innocent people? Wars are often waged in the name of national security, with leaders justifying their decisions by pointing to the need for safety and stability. But what if we looked beyond the battlefield? Beyond the headlines and victory parades, there lies a haunting reality, one that is rarely discussed but is felt deeply by countless people across the globe: the human cost of US wars. In the early morning of August 6, 1945, the world changed forever. A US B-29 bomber named Enola Gay soared over the Japanese city of Hiroshima, releasing a single bomb that would leave a lasting scar on history. Within seconds of detonation, the atomic bomb unleashed a blinding flash, a deafening roar, and a wave of destruction that flattened the city. Over 80,000 people were killed instantly, their lives snuffed out in a horrifying instant. But the horror didn't end there. The survivors, or hibakusha as they would later be called, were left to face the aftermath, a reality filled with radiation sickness, severe burns, and the unimaginable trauma of losing everything in the blink of an eye. Just 3 days later, on August 9th, a second atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki, compounding the devastation. In total, over 200,000 civilians perished as a result of these bombings, not just from the initial blasts, but from the lingering effects of radiation, which poisoned the land and the people for years to come. Children born to survivors suffered from birth defects, and entire generations grew up under the shadow of these bombings, their lives forever altered by an event they had no control over. Afghanistan, the 20 Years' War. Fast forward to the 21st century, and we find ourselves in Afghanistan, a country that became the center of the US war on terror. Following 2001, American forces invaded Afghanistan with a clear goal: to dismantle al-Qaeda and remove the Taliban from power. What followed was a 20-year conflict that would become the longest war in US history. The toll on Afghan civilians was devastating. Entire villages were turned to rubble by drone strikes and bombings. Families were torn apart as women and children, often the most vulnerable, bore the brunt of the violence. The numbers are staggering. It is estimated that around 47,000 Afghan civilians lost their lives during the conflict, many of them innocent bystanders caught in the crossfire. But the human cost extends beyond just the death toll. This includes 8 million people displaced across international borders as refugees and asylum seekers, and 29 million people displaced internally to other parts of their countries, forced to flee with nothing but the clothes on their backs. The war shattered the livelihoods of countless Afghans, leaving a nation in despair and uncertainty. Iraq. In 2003, the US invaded Iraq, claiming the country had weapons of mass destruction, WWMDs, though none were found. The invasion led to 280,000 to 315,000 deaths from direct war-related violence. The initial shock and awe bombing aimed to quickly overthrow Saddam Hussein, but instead created a power vacuum, sparking widespread violence. Civilians were caught in bombings, shootings, and sectarian conflict, while basic services like water and healthcare deteriorated. The rise of extremist groups like ISIS further deepened the chaos, leaving Iraqis in fear and suffering. The invasion, intended to bring stability, instead caused immense hardship for millions. Libya. In 2011, Libya's protests against Muammar Gaddafi escalated into a civil war. NATO, led by the US, intervened with airstrikes to protect civilians, leading to Gaddafi's death in October 2011. However, his removal created a power vacuum, sparking ongoing conflict among rival factions. The hoped-for stability never materialized, leaving Libya in chaos, with widespread violence, destruction, and displacement. The intervention intended to protect civilians instead contributed to prolonged instability. Yemen and Pakistan. The drone wars. Since the early 2000s, the US has conducted over 400 drone strikes in Pakistan and more than 300 in Yemen, targeting suspected militants in its war on terror. These strikes, intended to minimize collateral damage, have often resulted in civilian casualties. In Yemen, between 2009 and 2020, at least 174 civilians, including women and children, were killed by drone strikes. In Pakistan, similar strikes have approximately 50,000 victims. The constant presence of drones has terrorized local populations. In Yemen, villages live in fear of sudden strikes, causing lasting psychological trauma. In Pakistan, drone strikes have fueled anti-American sentiment and destabilized already fragile regions, pushing some communities closer to extremist groups. The drone wars in Yemen and Pakistan have raised serious ethical concerns, as the human cost and long-term consequences of this remote warfare continue to unfold. The economic cost of war. When we think of war, we often focus on the immediate human toll: lives lost, homes destroyed, and communities uprooted. But there's another casualty that's often overlooked: the economy. The wars in Afghanistan and Iraq have come with a staggering price tag, one that has left an indelible mark on the US economy. According to the Costs of War project at Brown University, the US has spent over $2 trillion on the war in Afghanistan alone, with the total cost of post-9/11 wars approaching $8 trillion. This immense expenditure wasn't just a financial transaction, it was a choice, one that diverted resources away from critical domestic needs. Imagine what could have been accomplished with those trillions. The US could have revitalized its crumbling infrastructure, funded universal healthcare, or invested in education, ensuring that every child had access to quality schooling. Instead, that money was funneled into a seemingly endless cycle of conflict, leaving the country with little to show for it but a mountain of debt. The national debt has ballooned to over $35 trillion, with war spending being a significant contributor to this burden. This debt is not just an abstract number, it's a looming threat to future generations who will bear the financial strain of decisions made decades ago. Opportunity costs. The economic impact of war isn't just about the money spent, it's about what was sacrificed. The concept of opportunity cost means that every dollar used for war could have been invested elsewhere, such as in renewable energy, medical research, or education. These missed opportunities represent a significant loss. For US citizens, the cost of war is felt in higher taxes, reduced social services, and economic instability. When war is prioritized over welfare, ordinary Americans bear the burden, facing challenges like disrepair in their communities and diminished opportunities for a better life. The true cost of war extends beyond the battlefield, affecting everyday lives across the nation. The military-industrial complex. At the heart of this issue lies a powerful force that has shaped US policy for decades: the military-industrial complex. This term, first coined by President Dwight D. Eisenhower in his 1961 farewell address, refers to the symbiotic relationship between the military and the defense industry, a relationship that prioritizes profit over people. Major defense contractors like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and Raytheon have profited enormously from the endless cycle of war. These companies rake in billions of dollars each year, benefiting from a system that incentivizes conflict rather than peace. But while these corporations enjoy record profits, the public bears the cost. Taxpayer money that could have been used for public good is instead funneled into the coffers of defense contractors. Meanwhile, average citizens are left to grapple with the financial and social burdens of war. The military-industrial complex perpetuates a cycle where war is seen as not just inevitable, but profitable, where the human and economic costs are secondary to corporate gains. In this system, war becomes a business, and peace is bad for business. The moral responsibility of US citizens. In a democracy, the power to shape the future rests with the people, not just leaders. US citizens influence foreign policy through their votes and political engagement, making each election a chance to hold leaders accountable and prioritize peace. This power comes with responsibility. Voters aren't just choosing domestic policies, but also the principles guiding the nation globally. Yet, many may not consider the global impact of their vote. Ignoring these consequences can lead to complicity in government actions. In a system where power is shared, so is the responsibility for its outcomes. The impact on global perception. The moral responsibility of US citizens extends beyond voting. US military actions have far-reaching effects, shaping global perceptions of America. Interventions, often justified for security or humanitarian reasons, have fueled anti-American sentiment, particularly in regions like the Middle East and Southeast Asia. These actions have left communities devastated and fostered resentment and mistrust towards the US. This growing anti-American sentiment not only endangers US citizens abroad, but also threatens global stability. When a nation is seen as a threat, it becomes a target, potentially leading to more conflict and a cycle of violence. The long-term consequences of war, regional destabilization, the rise of extremism, and refugee crises linger long after the fighting ends. US citizens must decide whether to accept this responsibility. Will they allow their government to act unchecked, or will they demand a path of peace and justice? This decision will shape the future of both the US and the world. Rethinking US foreign policy. The history of US military interventions is long and complex, marked by moments of both triumph and tragedy. Yet, as we look back on the past 2 decades, it's clear that the cost of war, both human and economic, has often outweighed the benefits. With this in mind, it's time to re-evaluate the role of military intervention in US foreign policy. The path forward doesn't have to be paved with bombs and bullets. There are alternatives to war that can be just as effective, if not more so, in achieving national security goals. Diplomacy should be the first tool in the US foreign policy arsenal. By engaging in dialogue with adversaries, building alliances, and working through international institutions like the United Nations, the US can address global challenges without resorting to violence. Economic sanctions, when carefully targeted and combined with diplomatic efforts, can pressure regimes to change course without harming innocent civilians. International cooperation, too, offers a way to pool resources and share the burden of maintaining global peace and security. These strategies aren't without their challenges, but they offer a more sustainable and humane approach to conflict resolution than military force. Learning from the past is crucial to preventing future mistakes. The wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, and beyond have shown us the limits of military power and the unintended consequences that can arise from even well-intentioned interventions. As a nation, the US must critically reflect on these experiences and embrace a more restrained approach to future conflicts. This means asking tough questions about the true costs and benefits of military action and being willing to say no when the risks outweigh the potential rewards. It's time for a foreign policy that prioritizes peace, diplomacy, and the well-being of all people, not just those within US borders. Empowering citizens. Rethinking US foreign policy is not just the government's responsibility, it also lies with the citizens who elect leaders. An informed and engaged public is crucial for creating a more peaceful world. However, the true costs of war are often hidden by sensationalist media. To drive change, US citizens must educate themselves on the realities of war and its impacts globally and at home. Education is the first step. Citizens should seek out reliable information, critically assess narratives, and consider the perspectives of those affected by US actions. By doing so, they can challenge mainstream narratives and advocate for more informed foreign policy. Action is also essential. Advocacy can take many forms: participating in peace marches, contacting elected officials, supporting veterans, or volunteering with organizations that aid refugees. Citizens can help shift US foreign policy toward diplomacy, human rights, and global cooperation. By empowering themselves and demanding change, US citizens can help create a foreign policy that truly reflects American values, promoting peace, justice, and dignity for all. This effort can turn the lessons of the past into a foundation for a brighter future. Conclusion. As we stand at the crossroads of history, it's crucial to remember that the blood of the innocent cannot be washed away with ignorance. Each of us, as citizens of a democracy, holds the power and the profound responsibility to shape a more peaceful future. The decisions we make, the votes we cast, and the actions we take all contribute to the direction our country and our world will go. Now is the time to reflect deeply on the impact of war and to choose a path that prioritizes humanity over conflict. Educate yourself, vote with conscience, and support organizations that tirelessly work toward peace and justice. The choice is yours, and it's a choice that can change the world. If you found this video insightful, please share it with your friends, and if you think I need any kind of changes, then tell me in comments below.